Hi, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. Great to have you here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour is a general discussion of production and IT-related topics where we answer audience-submitted questions. Our second hour is typically a deeper dive into a topic, and today you would all be forgiven if you thought we had a law firm as our second guest, but no. Our guest panel today, Keith Lee, Francis, and Lipnick, they're not lawyers, but rather audio professionals, and include our own Office Hours regulars, Jeff Keithley, AKA around here is 1F Jeff, in part to distinguish him from Jeff Francis, who are also lucky enough to have with us today, as well as Andy Lipnick. The three of them are going to really help us get wise about Dante, the technology behind our own Office Hours back-end comm system, and much more, and how this area of digital processing is helping everybody, cruise around the world, collaborate on shows, particularly the back-end comm systems, more efficiently. That's all in our second hour. Our first hour is, as always, about answering your questions. And Jason, what have we got today?
Thanks, Bill. Ray Franklin writing in from Mount Dora, Florida. With so many apps and programs running on multiple machines, how does the panel check to see if they're running the latest version? Many programs do not have a notice or a push update available.
I'm going to start with Sky here today and then go to Mickey and Jason. Sky?
Well, my history is with Avid software, and we would often wait and do any updates until we're between projects, because the last thing you want to do is break your tool that you're depending on, because something will always break, because even though the video card is connected to the audio card, is connected to the hard drive, and all of those have to work in harmony. So I usually wait to update until I've got a downtime.
Fair enough. Mickey?
Yeah, I'm with Sky. We don't rush into any updates as much as we could. We do it in between projects, and we rely on a project's specific requirements to tell us which version we should run on. Sometimes we would have to actually roll back to previous versions depending on the project. In terms of how we check to see if there are new versions, we usually rely on newsletters or emails from the application manufacturer, or emails from our similar to Sky, emails from our rep from Avid to let us know what's new, what features have been released, what could be broken, what are known issues with the new release. And aside from those official channels, we also rely on the community to for example, like a post-production sound community or a music studio community, to let us know if there's something new with the tools that we use in the studio.
Jason?
Well, I never do this. Yeah, I'm never in a hurry to do any updates. But when I'm, for example, working with a client, it's really easy to use an app called Mac Updater from corecode.io. Does a fantastic job of just looking at all of your versions and surfacing whether or not a version is available. I use that typically for just version comparison, and then I typically actually don't use the app itself to do the installation. I just, I get the notification, go to the website, and do the download that way.
Nigel?
Yeah, another one for Mac Updater, like Jason, what I use, I really look for the difference between, version, release, and modification. Because if there's a modification, which typically is the third number, that implies they've fixed something. The moment you're in a new version or new release, there's new function, which opens you up to challenges. So Mac Updater is a great tool. It does search. It doesn't seem to work well with the Adobe software, so it can be a bit touchy, but that's the one I run on all my machines to see where I could be going.
Fair enough. I think that pretty much covers it. Hopefully that was helpful. Next question.
Ari Block writes in, thoughts on Blackmagic Cloud, comparison with Frame.io?
Sky's going to help us out here.
Well, yesterday I received an announcement that Frame.io is introducing a new connection with Red, and I think it's Fuji camera, and consequently that means they're pushing the concept of eliminating the hard drive in between, and they are your solution. So consequently, as Blackmagic has resources available to it as well to do this same workflow, I think the concept of eliminating a hard drive between the camera and your workforce around the world, I think that's the bigger hurdle. So is Blackmagic going to do okay and jump into this? I think we're yet to be seen, but Frame.io is really leading the charge on this concept.
Mitchell?
Maybe a question on top of a question, and that is, if you're doing it real time up the Frame.io, Are you getting latency issues where everybody has to sit around and wait while the camera updates the cloud, or can you just move on with something else?
I think that's what they're working on to try to eliminate or at least get as low as possible. Literally, they have a system where in the field, as you're recording, you could be streaming kind of simultaneously up to the cloud. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be any latency, and I'm not sure that this is designed to be a live production solution, although they may be going in that direction. But everything I know about it says that a little bit of latency is acceptable for the protection of being able to do two things. Number one, make sure all of your stuff is backed up into the cloud kind of in real time. And more importantly, to allow your collaborators, because that's really what Frame.io is based around, to have access to that material as soon as possible. Sky, do you have some other notes before I have another?
One of the announcements yesterday was at a sports team in California, a major league sports team, is using Frame.io to turn video around within minutes into social media. So they're kind of using it like a recording system, and that used to take big trucks of hardware and big fat pipes and big fast hard drives, and consequently, to your question, the real time, it's getting really close.
I've seen the NFL filmers have a proprietary device that's on a camera back, and when they're out shooting on the field, it's going right to their headquarters to be ingested and then pushed out to social media and broadcast.
Yeah, I would imagine that NFL with their kind of money will be doing that. The one thing that I'm mindful of with the Frame.io workflow, it is by design, and I think that was a smart design, a very heavily protected walled garden, which is to say that once you're in a Frame.io session, nobody can get to it. It was originally designed as something that they wanted to market into like the movie makers and things like that for collaborative workflow, which means that security was a very high priority in the design of their entire system. That has pluses. It also has minuses. I mean, they talk about the fact that when Adobe bought Frame.io and took it out of the kind of individual company and brought it into the Adobe fold, that they were going to keep supporting everything else other than Adobe products, and they have to a certain extent. I do find less development on the Mac platform, which I use, so I am been a little less bullish on it. Some of these things that they're doing also tend to work on that high level of Hollywood, things like that, and I'm not sure that Frame.io is the way it's developing now works as much for me as an individual. It might. Other users who are an individual might find it absolutely perfect. I'm just a little less bullish than I used to be because of those changes. They may not affect you at all. And certainly the technology, the engineering behind it and everything else, they're doing world-class work up there. But I just hope it doesn't get wrapped too much into the Adobe subscription mindset such that it isn't now, and you can use Frame.io without having any sort of an Adobe subscription. But in the long run, that has me just a little concerned, but that's just me. This could not be everybody, and that may not be the way it develops. So trying to be fair about it, but that's just how I feel. Let's go on to the next question. Oops. Jason, I think you're muted. Oops, I still don't hear you. Something's gotten in the way. You're muted either by Zoom or by your microphone or something. Doesn't know what to do.
I'll grab it.
Mitch,
Paul Wallace, Valhus from Austin, Texas, has a question. Would it be possible to get Todd Harris in After Hours Lab about esports? That was a really great show.
I concur totally. Todd did a fabulous job on Office Hours. Was it just yesterday? It was just within the last day or two, and I had so much work to do last night that I'm a little out of time. But yeah, he did a fabulous talk through. No, it was on Monday with Liberty. Great show. And if you didn't see that and you have any interest in how esports works, I'd highly recommend you go back and watch that. He had a lot to say about the juggernaut that is all of these esports, gaming, how all of that works in the web, and kind of a look at the back end of how the business all functions. Very, very important and illuminating information in that program. So I'd highly suggest everybody go back and take a look at it if you hadn't seen it when it came out originally. Let's move on to the next question.
Tim Home from San Lorenzo, California, using OBS with NDI plugin on a Windows machine. The audio through Sienna NDI monitor on iPhone is playing audio at like quarter speed. Ideas?
And we're lucky we have Mickey Makachour on the panel today, who will have some ideas on this. Mickey?
Yeah, I'd probably check that OBS's sample rate is set to 48 kilohertz. And also, if you have plugged in an audio interface into your iPhone, say even like a Bluetooth headset, make sure that the headset or whatever interface it may be is connected prior to launching the Sienna NDI Monitor app. Another thing you might want to check as well is if the NDI feed is being picked up properly on another computer that is running, say, NDI Monitor, and make sure that that path is working so you can start to pinpoint where the fault may be happening.
Moving on, next question.
TJ Asher from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, who's getting a new iPad or Apple TV, and perhaps more importantly, why?
Javier.
Well, an Apple TV for me right now will be a no. I think the last model is still underutilized. I think we still have to see a 120 hertz Apple TV. So I'm not buying that one. But the iPad Pro, I definitely am going to buy that one. My workflow has changed a lot since 2 years or 3 years ago. Now I think the iPad Pros are basically like a full-on production computer, except for some things. And it makes more sense to have like an maybe a Mac Mini or something like that, and not have like this, what I call the desktop laptop. There's this laptop that you take with you everywhere. 2 years ago, that made more sense. But with the new iPad OS and the new M2 in the iPad Pro, it's definitely a yes for me.
And Nigel.
I think it's fascinating that because they did no big announcement, I am not buying anything. Maybe I have missed all the big benefits that I could be getting. On the iPad Pro, I have the M1. I don't see any benefit in the M2. It looks, obvious they need to rev their products. It looks like a rev. The Apple TV looks like it has HDR10 plus if you have a Samsung TV. I don't know. I'll see the difference in my setup. So thank you for not doing a big announcement. It may have saved me lots of money.
And Sky.
As an Apple fanboy, yeah, I'll admit it in front of friends. I would traditionally, rush right out to buy the next shiny new thing. But now that I've matured a little bit anyway in my what is the tool doing for my, and how is it paying for itself, I have some very good tools that are all Apple, and consequently I'm probably going to hold for a little bit, but and like Javier, my workflow is a little different than it used to be, so I don't need the latest and shiniest. And as we talked about, iterations of things sometimes aren't compatible with your existing workflow, but bigger, better, faster. I'm interested.
I was kind of shocked the fact that they are selling this model, which has more speed, better chips, more capacity, and they're selling it for less money than the previous model. May that model continue throughout the entire industry, left, right, and center. It's just amazing to me. We're so conditioned to the fact that when they add more to a product, the first thing they add more to is cost. And in this case, Apple has flown against it. I'm sure it's a bid to try to get more Apple TVs in more homes. I am a happy user of one myself, and I wish I could get a rebate on what I spend on mine, because now I'm in the position of having a slightly less capable machine that I actually paid more money for, but the enjoyment I've gotten out of using it over the course of the last 2 years, has been more than enough to justify what I spent for it. So I don't have a problem with that. But I just think that's cool, and I hope more companies will do that. Make things, if they can produce them less expensively and they have a reason to sell them for less, go for it. Let's go on to the next question.
John Snyder, Reno, Nevada, asks, Zoom on my Mac always logs myself out when opening on a PC. The PC will remember my username and password, but Mac never does, even with Remember Me checked. Is there a way to fix this?
And nobody has raised a hand on that. And I don't know much about that back end stuff. I'm suspicious that is maybe a security problem, but I don't know enough about that side of things to give you a better answer than that, John. So I think this is one of those circumstances where the panel, the way it exists right now today, does not have a lot of security thing. We don't have a security day specifically, but I think my best advice to you is hold on to the question, copy it, and maybe try it on a different day where there's maybe a different configuration of the panel, and maybe we'll have one of our security experts here who can, not security, but Zoom experts here who can really dig into that. Sorry. Next question.
And it's in from Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Graham asks, why when I try to convert my 15 gigabyte AVC HD file to ProRes, does it end up more than 200 gigabytes? I'm just using Resolve Studio, but there must be a better way. It would be nice, but moderately priced might be okay if it was free. Thank you for your information.
And Mickey's going to try to help you out here. Mickey?
Yeah, depending on how much the original AVC HD file is compressed, you can certainly end up with a file that's over 200 gig once converted to ProRes 422 or higher. I'd say this is the better way, certainly. Storage is cheap. The time spent to work on clips that slip in and out of sync and aren't exactly reliable for editorial purposes is expensive. Storage is cheap.
Sky.
Well, editorially, I know that the different softwares are they're coded to work with certain codecs, and consequently, I trust ProRes. AVC HD is something that sometimes does slip, to Mickey's point. So while it used to be that hard drive was very expensive and throughput was a challenge, Apple always liked its product that it created and knew how to speak the ProRes language since it created it. So that's an insight on it may be bigger, but it may be better.
Yeah, I would suspect that it is. I mean, that's basically what you're doing is you're converting from a capture codec to a mezzanine codec that allows for more efficient editing. The nature of mezzanine codecs is that each frame is a discrete thing, as opposed to capture codecs that often use interframe compression or intraframe, and all the frames aren't actually there. They have master frames, iframes, then they have predictive frames, and they have all sorts of mathematical stuff going on so that they don't have to store each frame discretely, and that's great for efficiency of storage. Get more footage on a card or something. But when you go to edit, you really need each and every frame to be a discrete thing. And the calculations to turn that compressed footage into editable footage that edits smoothly is probably what you're facing. It's pretty typical to end up with a substantially larger file because it has substantially more useful information in it. Hope that helps. So, Sky, do you have another thought before we finish?
Well, I do remember the early days of when the Canon camera came out and they used the H.264 codec, and we were all just, as editors, just shocked. But then we realized it was the efficiency that they needed to get the footage down to the smallest frame. But it was not historically, H.264 was a delivery codec, but not a capture codec. So that's what they're doing, the dance of trying to squeeze an elephant in through a stir straw. And so sometimes it's a challenge.
That's not an easy thing to do. Hopefully that helps you understand more about what's going on. This is pretty typical, and I think all of us who edit a lot see files get big when they get transcoded a lot. Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana writes in, he starts with a press release from podnews.net and says, but what does it really mean for small creators?
And no one seems to have uncompressed this, read through it, and figure out. I know I have not had the time to do it, Chris, so I'm sorry. But PodTrack Sales Network ranking launch. There's not enough detail in here for me to kind of parse that out, and I don't have time to open it up and try to read through it live on the air. So maybe, like I suggested before, if you can hold on to the thought, come back a different day and get this in early enough so that we have more time to do some research in. This would be a question that would be good to have in almost the night before so that the panelists who want to address it can get in there and figure out what's going on. Sorry about that. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael writing in, would there be any practical use cases for a small PBX, asterisk-free PBX at all in a residential installation beyond the educational value of installing and configuring it?
Mickey has a thought.
I think maybe 3-4 years ago, I would say, yeah, why install a PBX in a residential environment? But say if one finds themselves in a situation where, they're a large family, multiple people working at home, probably an extended family in a single home working at home, and everyone needs some sort of access to a landline for some reason, I can see how a PBX may come in handy, and you can, throw, what do you call this, forward a call to another person's phone. And I'm sure Nigel can talk about his massive houses that he works on.
Nigel?
Yeah, I was going to say it depends how big your house is. Because, if we're talking about a fairly large estate, which may have a master house, a number of other outhouses, buildings, then you could see a PABX connect all of those, particularly if one of them's an office and one of them's a games room. And I know we're at the end of hundreds of millions of dollars type houses, and you often see that. I would tell you that most whole home integration systems are now including systems in them that allow you to effectively do intercom from room to room, whether that's from, an Amazon device or something, all the way up to a Crestron system. And I think that's probably going to take over the inter-house communication. And mostly if you've got a fairly decent phone with a good Wi-Fi, you'll get a good signal anywhere in the house.
And Jason?
Yeah, I've found it actually very useful. I have not really a PBX, but a Ubiquiti phone installation in my new studio in my office. And I think just the intercom alone is really, really handy because it allows me to pipe the channels separately. I could imagine that in a larger house being very handy.
I just have two things to say about this subject, and one is fax machine and the other is laser printer. I remember at various points in my life people saying to me, why in the world would you ever need a laser printer in your home? And I remember somebody else saying, why in the heck would you ever need a fax machine in your home? And over the course of time, each of those things went from being a ridiculous idea to being accepted common standard. As phones get more complex, maybe this becomes something that people have to look at. So next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana writes in, specking out an Ultra Studio with my fingers crossed that it gets approved. How much of a difference would the 64 to 128 gig RAM jump really affect live video production with Zoom ISO, if any?
Let's start with Mickey, then go to Sky.
Specifically for Zoom ISO, no, you do not need that much memory to run Zoom ISO. And you mentioned live video production, in case you might be doing some 3D rendering, like live 3D rendering, say with tool like Unreal, although I don't know why you do that on Mac. You might come across the need for more memory, especially if you have very large resolution textures.
And Sky.
Yeah, to Mickey's point, the headroom is how many applications you're running at the same time. Specifically, if you're just using the single machine with the single app, I wouldn't think you'd need the 128. But if you're like me, I have multiple applications open and running at the same time. Historically, as long as the software is written to access and use that brain power, then yeah, I'd want as much as you can afford.
Nigel had some thoughts?
Yeah, I have an Ultra with 64. I've got 4 NDI of Zoom ISO, no problems at all. But that's the only thing I've been doing on the machine. And I think the more you add to it, the more you're going to struggle. I know Mac memory is different from traditional memory, but I always buy as much as I can afford.
And I think that's always proved to be a pretty wise strategy. And Nigel, you're coming in a little bit soft. I just wanted to make a note because I want to make sure we hear everything you're saying. Next question.
Jeff Francis writes in from Columbia, South Carolina. Do any panelists have experience with Multicamzilla? Multicamzilla.com. Thoughts?
Well, Jason, you're the only one who clicked in. So
Sure, I'll bite. I used its predecessor, Camzilla, way back before OBS even existed. And yeah, it was fun. But honestly, it's probably been through so many revisions that it would be unrecognizable from today's version. So I don't have any direct experience with this directly.
And we all understand multicam. What does the Zilla add to it? Is it
Zilla? It's picture like a combination of all of the lower thirds or confetti or basically any sort of combination of keyer and animator. It was kind of this all-in-one before webcam production really went professional.
Okay, good. That helps me understand the area we're talking in.
It says it's a multicam wired camera controller allowing single operator to control up to 8 cameras, and then it has a whole bunch of other things on their website. So it's it's quite a combination of tools.
So it's kind of a virtual switchery kind of thing? Who knows? Okay.
We'll look forward to hearing from Jeff.
Yeah, well, I believe Jeff will be on later. I'm not necessarily sure of that, but let's keep our fingers crossed. Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana writes in, what is the best budget way to have a small camera like a Mevo or similar, not GoPro, over a stove with steam while keeping the lens clear?
Ooh, Mickey Makachor is going to take a shot at this.
You can use some of those yellow ventilation ducting that's placed in a way so that it pulls the steam away from the camera before it reaches up there and wherever the camera is mounted. We usually have that with the actual fan outside of the building. So of course, the noise of the fan doesn't bleed into your microphones. Another thing that is often done is not have the cameras directly above the pot or the stove, and have it come in at an angle instead.
And Sky.
Yes, that's exactly what we did with Madeline Kitchen. We took a longer lens, put it off to the side. We did mount it up in the ceiling, so we had some crossbars up in Madeline's kitchen, and then we're able to use a longer lens. You don't get the direct down or the over the top, but we did kind of an over the shoulder, which we kind of like that aesthetic, which is a creative choice, by the way, is where you place that camera, and then she would play to it occasionally. So that was an option.
Interesting. When you did that, when you came to the OTS shot, did crossing the line ever get into an issue? The fact that you would move from behind?
We crossed the line when we started the show.
Okay.
We embraced, that was our show.
Okay.
Way over the line.
Perfect. Mitch.
Yeah, avoid the steam. It doesn't necessarily mean the camera has to be just over where the steam is exiting, because there's a lot of devices out there that can deal with that. But in a pinch, listen to this tip. I've used Rain-X on a cheap lens. Do not.
I was just about to say, don't ever do that. Oh my God.
Do not put Rain-X on a quality lens, because it's a coating and it will mess with your camera big time. So if you got a cheap camera with a cheap lens, maybe.
There you go, Mickey.
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well. You mentioned specific cameras, the Mevo and Mevo similar, but not the GoPro. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're shooting with traditional, broadcast cameras or ENG cameras, what is often done as well is to have a mirror up above, mounted at a 45-degree angle, pointed forward, so away from the presenter, and you have cameras on sticks on the ground shooting up towards the mirror, and that mirror reflects down, so to give you that top-down shot.
There's a moment, I think it's Showtime show called Julia. It's about Julia Child and her initiation into television. And they show you the moment when one of her director suggests that and became a staple of everything. It's really cool. Next question.
Oh boy, like an old school arcade game. I love that. David Brady from New York City writes in, with playback files via MIDI, QLab, or Shutter Playback Pro, what are the best codecs to use? We often ask for ProRes Lite, but thinking that might be kind of heavy. Given the previous discussion, delivery versus capture, what do you like?
Jason, you put in first, so you get to take off first.
I think it depends very heavily on the kind of production you're doing and the demands of like the quality that you're trying to play out. I have yet to have anything truly fail on MIDI. So a +1 on that front. But other than that, I'll give it over to Mitchell.
Mitch?
Always on a Mac, ProRes is going to play better because it's optimized for it. So even if it's a larger file, even if you have to transcode it from a 264, you're always going to get so much better control. Sometimes I've found with some of these playback systems, if you have a highly compressed file, sometimes it gets hung up when you're jogging around trying to find a spot on it, because, again, it's got those iframes all over the place.
Yeah, ProRes LT has been very solid for me. If I have something like a significant many multicam edit ahead of me, I will try to make a ProRes LT transcode so that I can work with it. That's in addition, that's if the standard proxy transcodes, which come as part of the software, I don't think are enough. But It's been a pretty good format for me the few times that I've used it. I know Alex is not real happy with it. And if you have enough bandwidth, enough storage to work with ProRes Standard or ProRes HQ, there is a lot of benefit, particularly in color science, to using those. But it's a good alternative. Next question.
Alexander Knight writes in from Vancouver, BC, Canada. I'd like to eliminate my wall wart power supplies. Is there a rack mount distribution box that is modular and supports various voltages, 5, 12, DC, etc.?
One of the places you might look, there is a whole side of our industry for people who do recording in the field, particularly the sound guys I have found have very complex power distribution systems, often working off of 12-volt batteries or marine batteries or something like that, and often robust enough to handle not just a recorder, but all sorts of charging things for wireless mics and things like that. I'm just saying there's a lot of research done in the DC distribution space in that side of our business. So it might be wise of you to take a little time and look on some of the Soundies sites. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but Sky, you have some ideas?
Well, recently, a lot of the tools that I'm using have the USB. That's the plug they give me to power into the wart. And so consequently, I've now found power strips that have the USB ability. And of course, they're powered USB strips. So consequently, that's one of the solutions to get your power to all the different tools that if your equipment allows you to use that, or ships with that as its power source.
Yeah, I found that a lot. A lot of the power strips nowadays are coming with not just Edison plugs, but with 2 or 3 standard USB-A plugs, because there's so many devices that need power coming off of that. But yeah, hopefully that's a couple of tips that can help you, Alexander. Let's move on. Paul, next question.
Paul Walhus from Austin, Texas writes in, when you get an app from the Android or Google Play Store, it shows you all of your devices and you can remote install the apps. What is the iPhone equivalent?
Javier?
Well, I haven't found like the exact equivalent, but what I use is there's a setting in iPadOS and the iOS in the App Store settings that it's automatically download whatever you download in other devices. So I do it the other way around. I let it download to every device, and then if I don't want it there, I can take it out. But that's what I found to do that.
Jason.
The iOS equivalent of that is from eternalstorms.at, and it's called Transloader, and it will actually allow you to download an app and to push it to Mac OS and to iOS.
There you go. Hopefully those will help you out. Next question.
See, Douglas Carmichael writing in, do you think the M1 Max and Ultra Mac Studios will be eclipsed by an M2 Mac Mini for audio workflows?
And Nigel's going to help us first.
Yeah, so I think if your current M1 is absolutely maxed out and you are getting you're redlining it, then I think there'll be some benefit of going to the M2. If, however, it's not, then it's really just going to be a product bump, and there isn't going to be anything significant. There really isn't a huge change between revs unless they make a big architectural change. So if, for instance, you're actually using ProRes and they double the number of cars that can do the decoding, that might produce something significantly different. But I think mostly a bump from 1 to 2 won't make a huge difference.
And Mitchell.
Yeah, I think Nigel's steering you the right direction. An M1 Mac Mini running audio, I think if you look at your CPU usage, you'll find that it's very low because audio does not require a huge amount of resources in order to play back. So I wouldn't hold off on going from your M1 to an M2. I think you're fine with what you've got. Somewhere down the road, you might want it if you start mixing lots and lots of tracks. But for now, I don't think so.
All right. Next question.
Paul Valhus writes in from Austin, Texas. Are there any tips, tricks, or hacks around using AirTags? And could we have an after-hours AirTags training session?
Nigel's going to start us here.
Yeah, I don't know whether you'd need an after-hours training session because it takes about 10 seconds to set one up. I think that the biggest thing you have to think through is the logistics. If 2 of you are traveling and you put AirTags in your bags, for instance, which AirTag is going to be associated with which person's phone. So I made a mess of this the other day, so let me try and be clearer. Multiple AirTags to a phone, however, you can't have multiple phones to an AirTag. So when my wife and I travel, a couple of the tags are against her phone, a couple of the tags against mine. We can't see each other's. So getting that logistics right, I think, is the important part.
And Mitchell.
I just read somewhere that the airlines are not happy with AirTags. I don't know if it's because they don't like the word
It was one airline, and they immediately 86. That was Lufthansa, and Lufthansa said for a while that they didn't trust AirTags and their avionics, and then everybody piled on them like it was crazy on the web, saying they're proven not to cause any problems whatsoever. And Lufthansa took about 3 or 4 days, and then their PR department came back, and AirTags are just fine on Lufthansa now. So all,
as you say.
Yeah.
As you say.
Well, it was a big kerfluffle. I will say the one thing about AirTags, I've been using them for a couple of years now since they first came out. I got them, I guess, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And that is, it takes a couple of weeks to get your head around how they function in terms of things like the left behind system. I have one on my dog. I have one on my keys. I have one on a suitcase and things like that. And so the first time you drive away from home with your phone, you get a lot of, there was a device left behind. Well, yes, of course I left my luggage behind. That was for the trip. I don't need it anymore. So it takes a while for you to say, no, I don't care about that. And then the system learns that you don't care about leaving your suitcase behind unless you're traveling someplace. And then you do care about leaving it behind. So there's a little logic behind the system. And it seems to me that it's gotten more intelligent as I've clicked on the no, it doesn't matter that I've left my dog behind today. I knew that. And then it stops asking me, or it stops reminding me that I've left the dog behind when I go to the supermarket. So it takes just a little while to get the system kind of rolling. But once you do, it's very useful. Jason?
Yeah, I will add to that I've added them to basically every Pelican case that I take into the field, and I have found them to be incredibly useful. But I had to start renaming them very carefully because I have enough Pelican cases that, like, the Pelican 15 something isn't useful anymore. So, I had to dial up my specificity as I increased my number of air tags, and it's always best to do that when you are in the vicinity of the air tag. If you don't, sometimes the name change will get a little goofy.
Yeah, the other thing that we ran into is that Linda had them on her keys and I had them on my keys, and she got warned that I was stalking her. It has a system in there.
Stalking your wife?
I'm stalking my wife. It has a system in place so that if you have air tags and they're somehow following, if two air tags are in the same vicinity going in the same way and they're registered to two different people, that's hard to distinguish from a stalking situation. And Apple's very careful about that. So you have to kind of manage that. It's not hard, but you do have to do it. By the way, our panelists have been blazing through these questions. So if you've got a couple more, we could use them. We've got another half hour to go here, and we're just being very, very efficient here. So let's move on. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writing in, the Ubiquiti Unify range seems to be an integrated platform, voice, security, et al., not just an IT infrastructure vendor. How is their support compared to enterprise vendors like Cisco and Juniper?
Mickey's going to help us first.
Yeah, I find the support for Unify to be very, very substandard. I get a lot more support from the community that uses Unify, and even documentation in terms of their SSH commands to configure their Edge line of products. I get a lot more of it from the community than the official sources.
And Jason.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Their support is sparse at best. I think they're trying to ramp that up, but they have so many products with so many revisions that, and they're scaling them so quickly that I think training is actually the reason that they're falling behind. They're really just kind of exploding into all sorts of things. Security, access control. They even have an elevator controller. So it's kind of nuts. You can, charge your EV, and there's access control for that. Everything's built in. So yeah, I find it to be sparse at best.
And Mickey.
Yeah, I just want to add though that that's kind of what you get when you go. Their products are relatively affordable compared to say solutions from Cisco. Cisco, comes with the Cisco price, so you get what you pay for.
Fair enough. And let's move on to what may be the last question here.
All right. Douglas Carmichael writing in, Arturia announced the Mini Freak synthesizer yesterday. He includes the link, but the manual's not on their website yet. Why could that be?
That's going to be a difficult one. It's kind of specific, and we don't have anybody, I guess, here who has experience with this particular system. As to manuals, it's been a funny thing for me just in general in manuals. Once upon a time, you always look for the physical manual. Then they all went online. And then I noticed a small thing started happening, which is none of the manufacturers wanted to host their manuals anywhere. So you got these manual websites that were just aggregators of tons and tons of manuals. And I find it harder and harder to find manuals these days. Hopefully, over the course of time, that'll straighten itself out. But I don't know anything about Arturia and how that particular synthesizer does it. Also, this is going to be the new audio day, I believe. There was a conflict in some of our finest audio brains, and there was a request that we move from Tuesday to Wednesday. So more audio stuff will happen on Wednesday here in the future. But I think this first day, we probably don't have quite as many as we would normally have. Jason's going to help us out a little too, though.
So, I can speculate about this. My guess is, if the voices or the patches, whatever it is that makes this different than your run-of-the-mill Arturia piece of equipment, they may have outsourced it. And if they outsourced it, there's a good chance that they haven't quite managed to get all the documentation in or standardize the language for translation around, the way that they are going to describe each specific patch. That's my guess.
And Nigel also had a thought.
Yeah, I would separate out the announcement date and the availability date. If the product isn't yet available, then the manual won't be available, and they will be synchronized around that.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. We do have a few more coming in. So as always, congratulations and thank you to all of our producers out there for helping the show run smoothly.
That's right.
Next question.
Thanks to the producer, Josh Kaufman, writing in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What is the panel's preferred media distribution service? Frame.io is a favorite. I'd like to distribute media to clients after events and transfer large files.
And Javier is going to start us out.
Well, my favorite one is also Frame.io, but I have to deal a lot with things like there are different clients that have different websites blocked for their corporate accounts. So some of them are like, I can't use Dropbox, I can't use Frame.io, I can't use. So the one that I always resolve to is WeTransfer. That's like the one that they haven't blocked everywhere. But I don't like that as much, but you have to work with what the client needs. So I just start jumping between them depending on what they are allowed to download.
That makes sense. Mitchell.
I agree with Javier. I like to use WeTransfer when I can, but I'm in a situation where I'm doing some high-end confidential work for the pharmaceutical industry, and they require, among other things, an air gap between my editing computer and the internet. So no cloud work. So my favorite way of distributing stuff is via SneakerNet, which is on a hard drive, in my hand, into FedEx, and off to the client. They won't allow the alternative.
Sky.
Many a thumb drive has now become the delivery device, but also the little portable hard drives are allowing you to, like, the gigabytes and gigabyte files. But again, to a client, sometimes a large file is several hundred meg. Obviously, we're working in large video sources now, and we're dealing in terabytes. So consequently, when you say large files, yes, WeTransfer. The free version has a limit, but it's a one-time use only. But yes, Dropbox is a go-to for me, and they've modified a lot of their viewing abilities now too, and sitting from within their cloud platform. So I do kind of not like Google Drive, but even though because it's free, but it just seems clunky still. And Microsoft Azure and the whole 360, it within a closed environment of a enterprise system, it screams. It's amazing. But if you're on the outside trying to get in, there's a lot of hoops that they make you go through for good reason. It's security.
Excuse me, Mickey.
Yeah, for us, we find it mostly boils up to however the client wants it. What we find is that, say, for small transfers like 500 gigs or less, Frame.io gets the job done. But above that, we usually send, as Mitchell said, SSDs, 2, 4, 8 terabyte SSDs, and ship that over to them.
Jason?
Yeah, plus one on the sneakernet on this one, especially if I've got a client that's paid $30,000 for an event, I am always going to go as far as I can to impress them. And $100 SSD does not cost so much. I've gone so far as to actually have them laser etched with the event name and my logo just directly into the to the SSD. It looks really sharp and it costs less than you think.
Javier?
Sky's answer reminded me of the Dropbox launched something called Replay. That is like the Dropbox way of making Frame.io. So it's not as full-featured. It may not be as great in some things, but I mean, a lot of people have Dropbox. It's not costs anything on top. And some clients are more used to Dropbox than other delivery systems. And you can do the whole comments and download or view only. So it's like maybe you can, if you don't want to pay for Frame.io, it's a great alternative as well.
Sky, real quick.
And historically, Dropbox, people thought it was an app that would be evasive and in control of your system. And while that is a feature that it has, the web browser version is kind of painless. And so that's the delineation between those two.
Mickey, last thought?
Sorry, I'm just going to comment on the use of Dropbox to, say, transfer full like folder structures of files. It's painful.
And I'm just going to note real quick that when you said media distribution service, I wondered if you were talking about raw files or the actual finished things. I use for finished program distribution almost exclusively Vimeo Pro. And the reason I used it is I used to use a ton of Frame.io inside for getting a program right, for essentially having everybody weigh in on it, because it's fabulous for that. But as soon as it was approved, I would switch it over to Vimeo Pro, because it's a beautiful content distribution network that works as well for the public as it does for people who are going to be sending spots out and things like that. I do most of my distribution to TV stations and things like that now through Vimeo Pro, because they can pull that file down. And it seems to work for about 90% of the TV stations I have to deliver to. So it just depends on what you mean by media files. Let's move on to the next one. You guys have responded in incredible times. I think we're probably going to have to lock things because now we're not going to get through the list. But thank you.
Yeah, we will burn through them. Chad Lafarge writing in from Columbia, Missouri. Do you find that community support versus official corporate support is often favorable? Google product experts, Ubiquity community, vMix forums, all good examples.
Mickey?
I think for questions that aren't answered directly by the by official communications by the vendor, community is a very powerful tool. But always take what you read in, say, forums with a grain of salt. Usually, I trust more the community posts that reference the official communications. And you know, either say it is what is in the official communications is correct or incorrect. There are some people that post like what their opinions are, and those I filter out. I go for people that have facts.
Jason.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Mickey. This is kind of like, you know, treat somebody's opinion or, oh, I think this will work, or it might or might not work. Treat that like hearsay evidence. It's kind of, you know, iffy at best and should not be relied upon unless you're absolutely desperate.
And I'm just going to note here in the middle, since we've gone from famine to feast, your voting becomes even more popular. I don't think we're going to get to everything now that everybody came in with a flood of questions. So make sure that those of you who are producers who are watching the show, go into the queue and vote things up that you want us to deal with first. And we'll get to those at least. If we have to drop anything, it'll be the less voted questions. Sky?
So as a freelancer, I would go into other people's facilities, and that's when I recognized everybody builds their kit, their system, their way, in their order. So consequently, their opinion is valid in their environment. So consequently, I've seen product manufacturers go, yeah, it's up to the community to be the support, and they were very lax because in their little pool, it worked in their lab. But once you get it out in the wild, yeah, it's a different animal. So learn from anybody and everybody that's willing to help you.
Nigel, real quick.
Yeah, read the legal disclaimers around the forums. You'll find they protect the companies very well because it's very scary for a company. I think Mickey had the right advice. Triangulate, find multiple sources of something before you do it, because one may not be correct.
And let's go to the next question. I know this is from earlier, and it doesn't have a lot of votes, but let's see if we can take a swing at it. I'm not sure. Go ahead and read it.
All right. Paul Val, who's from Austin, Texas, writes in, Douglas asked a great question about PBX system, including asterisks. Has anyone explored the COM implications for our world of allstarlink.org?
And we didn't get anybody raising a hand on that, so I don't think so. So, Paul, I think you're going to have to come back with that one another day. Let's go on to the next question.
Harshid writing in, Jason, what is your workflow for alt tagging your YouTube stuff? Well, I'll just skip the middleman and answer it. I use AppleScript and a shortcut that basically just appends the set of different tags directly into the media.
All right, there you go. Next question.
Alexander Knight from Vancouver, BC writes in, what kind of cart with wheels should I get that will fit onto or into an elevator, looking for something that folds flat or for small gigs that can carry various Pelican-style cases safely?
Mickey's going to help us out.
Yeah, I'd take a look at if you want something like very light, I'd probably look at the Rock and Roller line of carts. If you want something that could be built up a bit more, the Magliner carts are very popular. And also, I would really, really want to get a couple carts from Innovative, but they're quite out of the price range, especially since I would have to ship them, and they're not sold locally here.
Jason.
I'm going to give a big thumbs down for the ones that you can buy at Sam's Club. I have cracked those in half repeatedly. So, yeah, don't go there.
And some of my favorites that I've had for decades are from Cartabag with K-A-R-T-A-BAG. Look for them on the web. They have collapsible rolling carts, and I have one that has the little wheels that come out so you can load it up with a bunch of cases and lean it back, and it stays there, so you don't always have to put your foot on it when you're trying to juggle multiple things. Cartabag stuff has been really robust, in my opinion. Continue. Next question.
Graham Cardwell from Belfast, Northern Ireland, writing in, could the panel recommend a good transcoding app? I'm editing in Resolve Studio on a MacBook Pro. Should I just generate ProRes as a proxy within Resolve or do something else? Which version of ProRes should I use? Is DNxHR any less space hungry?
Okay, we have a lot of people, so we're going to have to do 15 seconds apiece. Mitchell, you're starting out.
Okay, on a Mac, compression, media encoder with anything from Adobe. DNX is an Avid codec, so really don't need to use that unless for some reason you're editing an Avid.
Javier?
Another software that I use to encode is Shutter Encoder. It's like a graphic end for the FFmpeg script. So it's super smooth, it's free, and I really like it. Check it out.
Mickey?
Compressor, Adobe Media Encoder, Shutter Encoder, which is again a front end for FFmpeg, but it maintains metadata, which is excellent. And also DNX HD, DNX HR. They have different flavors similar to ProRes, and they're pretty much at par with each other at the different levels. Which flavor to go for, that would depend on what your source material would be. You typically don't want something that is that contains less information than your source material, and also take into account as well what your end delivery would be.
And Mickey, I'm sorry, it's gone. So we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, next up, Kenny Hampton from Greenville, Illinois writes in, I enjoy watching office hours using Mukana on my Mac. Is there a Mukana app version available or in the works for use on the go?
I'm not sure. And I think that's going to require Alex being back here in the lead chair, because Alex is the creator behind that. And Mitch, do you have a thought on it?
Yeah, short answer, yes, it's in the works.
Okay, there you go. Next question.
Stefan Fischer writing in from Würzburg, Germany. Can I use the recently launched Blackmagic Cloud service with 2 cloud pods on each side of the team, or must there be at least one Blackmagic Cloud Store Mini 8 terabyte on one side?
Nobody has popped in on this one either. Jason's going to help us a little.
Yeah, I can answer that. You can sync, as long as you've got one, you're good. In fact, you can actually sync with none, assuming that you have enough onboard storage on your home drive to just install the app. So yeah, it will actually work either way.
Okay, next question.
Douglas Carmichael writing in, Jason, you mentioned a $100 SSD that you would ship content to a client on. Wouldn't a lower-end SSD not be sufficiently performant for high-end audio and video? And I would say absolutely not. The Samsung T5, our beloved T5, 1 terabyte costs $139, and that's retail. So no, it'll be just fine.
Mickey and Mitch also want to get into this. Mickey, real quick.
For your final deliverable to the client, that would essentially be merely a transport drive. You would not expect, since it's a final deliverable, you would not expect any more work to be done on it. But if they do want to do more work on a final deliverable, then hopefully they would know best to put the media in a system that is capable of editorial, not merely a transport drive.
Mitchell, you want a thought real quick here?
Mickey's exactly right. Essentially, it's a bit bucket. You're just dumping stuff in there in order for it to be transferred into their ingest and encoding and recording and editing system.
Okay. Next question.
Harshid writing in from Daytona Beach and also on the panel. Can the panel suggest an alternative to Switchcraft, and what abilities can it provide?
Switchcraft is a venerable old company. It's been around a long time that had huge catalogs of all sorts of parts. Let's dive through this real quick. Mitchell, you're first, and then Mickey.
Neutrik.
Neutrik has lots of those same things. Mickey?
Yeah, for AV type of connectors, which I assume you're talking about, Harshid. Neutrik. There are other suppliers for different kinds of connectors for different industries and different purposes as well.
And there are catalogs that have tons of these things from a whole variety of manufacturers. One that I've always kept around is from Marker Tech, a company that's been around for a long time and have gazillions of switches and connectors and things like that. Next question.
Let me get there. There it is. Okay. If you get a 10th generation iPad, this is from Paul Valhus in Austin, what do you do with your old iPad other than recycle it or give it away? What single purpose uses could it have that don't require the latest version of iPad OS?
John Preto.
Two great apps. My soundboard app can run on older iPads, and my DMX controller, Luminaire.
There you go. Jason.
I've, over the years, used them as lighting controls, remote controls. I have one on my coffee table that runs my television and my Apple TV only, and also interfaces with my switcher.
And Nigel?
Yeah, ditto what Jason said. I would really use it for home automation. You can run all the different apps you have on one thing. You can lock it. And if you can find something like an iPort or similar, it's the perfect way to power it and have it on your table.
And in my case, I have Mukana Lite running, or not Mukana, Mukana Lite running on it, because that's how I'm keeping track of what the other discussion is in the other place, while I keep the primary one that I need on my thing. Mickey, got a real quick answer?
Yeah, Unity Intercom, additional machine for Unity. Also be able to trigger QLab or other OSC controllable machines using Touch OSC, which is very, very handy. And various controls, like say they're monitor controllers for studios that have an interface that can run on iOS devices.
Yeah, I've also found it useful for doing little teleprompting gigs out in the field if I got somebody real close. So there's a lot of little things that one of the early iPads will help you do. Read textbooks on it and things like that. All right. We do have one more. Do we have one more? Yeah, first hour. Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe we have two more. Douglas Carmichael, this is a little off topic, but yeah, we'll take it. In a story about the U.S. Space Force anthem, it was mentioned that U.S. Coast Guard chief musician Sean Nelson wrote the song solely on a piano with no computer at all. In this age of rapid turnarounds, isn't retro a bit out of sync with the times?
Mitchell Hill.
Well, as the great John Lennon used to say, whatever gets you through the nights, all right.
Yeah, Mickey, do you have a thought on this?
Every musician, every artist has a process. If they prefer writing on a true, real piano, then that's what gets the job done for them.
Sky.
I understand that the pencil is still available to write good words with, and it's the words that are important, not the tool.
Yeah, if you can do a great poem with a pencil, if it's great, it'll find an audience. All right, we have one more before we get to Dante. Let's knock this one out.
Sure. Richard Bowman from Defiance, Ohio writes in, I read that 87% of teenagers in the U.S. are using iPhones. Is this a good thing?
I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. I mean, every generation has said, those kids today, they're not like we were when we were young. And, this is the world they are living in and are going to have to navigate their way through. I've told the story before, and I'll do it just super quickly. And we got a bunch of people who will do also super quick. And my son was watching TV. He had his computer on his belly. He had an iPad next to him, and he was on his phone. So he was using 4 electronic devices at the same time. And I went, this is the world he has come into now. It is not like the world I came into, where I maybe had a TV in the living room when I was a kid, and some people didn't even have that. So it's just the way it is. Jason, Javier, and Sky will make quick comments, and then we'll move on.
It's worth saying that children do not shy away from complexity, and you'll often hear parents go, oh, they can do these amazing, complex, technical things. So if their choice is the iPhone, it's not because they are afraid of complexity. What it tells me is that Apple is somehow getting it all right.
Javier.
Yeah, I can only say it's a good thing for Apple they use iPhones, but I think it could be a good thing that everyone has internet access and mobile payments and a way for their parents to know where they are or ask for help. It doesn't have to be an iPhone, but that trend to people having at younger ages this kind of devices, I think it may work in the long run.
Sky.
Curious if it was Apple that sent that information out. So I would check your source. Now, the electronic device that 87% of teenagers, yeah, I'm sure that's the truth, because to Bill's point, transitions of how do we connect and communicate and get ourselves from place to place. I'm sure the same question was asked by people when the automobile came around.
Yeah, it just, what can you do? You have to deal with sometimes the world the way it is, not the way you might like it to be. And in terms of overdose of stimulus, I know my phone keeps telling me how many hours I've been on, and it scares me every time I see it, but there you go. Let's move. It's time. It's the top of the hour, and we are very fortunate today. The second hour topic is Dante. I didn't know anything about Dante 2 years ago when I started here in office hours. I'd never heard of it, and it has really become a high awareness in my brain, because I see what it has done for our community here on office hours. And in fact, there is a Dante connection in my left ear. Every day I do this show, and the back-end crew can help me not make mistakes and correct me when I do make mistakes and tell me what's coming next. And so I've been on intercom systems a lot in my life. I've done camera operator work and stuff like that. And I know the value of having a well thought out system for communication, because it's one of the things that really makes the difference between an amateurish and a professional production. Backstage communications are critical to that. And I know that's one of the things that Dante has enabled here in the world. So for us here on Office Hours, the fact that our panelists are distributed all around the planet, and the backstage crew, basically, the people who are switching the show, people who are handling audio and everything, are all over the planet. It's fabulous to have something where we can all be in constant communications virtually, and it works like a cohesive show. I'm going to ping on. Oh, good. Our guests are here. I see Jeff Francis has popped into the show, and Andy Lipnick has popped into the show. Old friends of mine from the Office Hours band. And I know one if Jeff Keithley was going to be here, but he was unable to do that. But we also have Mickey Makachor on the panel, who understands this stuff extraordinarily well. So I'm going to start by tossing it to Jeff and let Jeff explain kind of what we're going to be going through today. Jeff, take it away.
So this is Dante 101, our first installment. And the great thing is that the three of us come at Dante from different disciplines. And so this is kind of a basic overview I'll start with. Dante is to replace your wires. It's audio over IP. You might think it's named after the 14th century Italian poet famous for the Divine Comedy, but it's actually not. It's an acronym, and it stands for Digital Audio Networked Through Ethernet. So real quickly, let's break that down. Digital audio, what are we talking about? We're talking about professional digital audio, so uncompressed 24-bit and 32-bit digital audio at all the normal sampling rates from 44.1 up to 192 kilohertz. Multi-channel, so up to 512 bidirectional from each item, each particular unit in there. It is low latency. And the great thing that I love about Dante is it just moves your audio from one place to another. It doesn't touch your audio. So there's no sample rate conversion. There is no processing. Nothing will happen to your audio except go from place to place. Okay, so that's the DA, that's the digital audio. What does it mean to be networked? Well, instead of connecting one wire from a device to another and then from that device to another, everything connects to a hub. We're using standard computer networking technology, and devices are auto-discovered. We're going to look at that in Dante Controller here in a moment. Devices are discovered. Everything needs to be synchronized because we're talking about everything on one sample rate. So Dante will actually automatically select a clock leader to be in charge of sample clock. And it does that using precision time protocol, which is actually the same technology that's used for cell service. And we can actually have redundant networks, so we can have a primary and a secondary, so there's great redundancy and safety in that. And then that's the N. The TE is through Ethernet, so we're actually using true layer 3. So these are actual IP packets sent over normal networks. There are other systems that use Cat5, Cat6 cabling, but this uses true Ethernet, so we're actually sending those packets. Standard networking hardware, standard switches, standard cabling up to 100 meters. You want to go farther than that, you can switch to fiber. No Wi-Fi. Can't use Wi-Fi for Dante. So at this point, I think it'd be great to bring Andy on. He's got Dante Controller, and Dante Controller is the software that allows you to configure Dante. Now, an important thing to think about is that Dante Controller is not required to be on the network for Dante to work. It's only there to set things up. So Dante devices all talk to each other, and all the what are called subscriptions, communications between one device sending audio to another device, those are stored in the devices themselves. So you can turn off Dante Controller. It's a free software app, runs on Mac and Windows. Once you configure things, every time you plug in those devices, they will be auto-discovered, and that connection will reappear. So Andy, you want to show us what we've got there?
Oh, yeah. We have got two devices on this network currently. One is...
Can you come up a little, Andy?
Level-wise? Is that good?
No, yeah, that was better when you changed your microphone.
Yeah.
Great. Now you're coming in good.
This is a flaky mic. Okay. So, so I have two devices here. One is Dante Virtual Soundcard, which acts like any sound card. It can act like very much like a USB sound card. If you plugged in your Scarlett, that's a USB sound card. This happens to be a Dante Virtual Soundcard. It sits in the computer. And it's also a great way to get into Dante because I think it costs like $30 or $40 per instance. So very reasonably priced to get into this. The other device I have is an Avio. This is an Audinate device. This is a USB-A to Dante interface. It's a 2-in and 2-out interface. They cost about $150. They kind of look like this. I don't have one in my hand, but they kind of look like that. And they're very familiar to a lot of people on office hours, I think, too. That's basically what you're looking at in this screen. This is the primary screen that we generally deal with in Dante once we get everything set up. It's just the routing screen. It's how we get audio from one place to another. And up here we have the transmit. These are the transmitters. These are the receivers. You can think of these as, these are the things that have inputs that I need to send somewhere. They're receiving an input, and I want the output of this. For example, I want I'll open this up here. This Avio device, I want it to go somewhere. Currently, it's not going anywhere, but it could go to my computer if I wanted to. And here, we'll just make it. I'll make it. Actually, I'm not going to do this yet because we're going to do this later with another device to show you how that works. And Jeff, chime in, please, about the other things that we're looking at here. We have other tabs.
So at the moment, Andy has a network switch and Ethernet cabling from this Avio hardware device and another Ethernet cable to his computer, and is using the NIC on his computer and the software that creates a virtual sound card. And you can see the software for that at the bottom of the screen. Currently, he has it set up as an 8-in, 8-out device. So Dante can run from a stereo device in and out to all the way up to 512 channels, depending on the particular hardware, or in this case, software. You're limited to 64. And then we're going to bring another device online.
Yeah, and hold on. And Jeff, one thing that's probably worth mentioning now is this Dante Virtual Soundcard. I'm going to stop this. And
sorry,
it goes away.
Andy, I'm just going to jump in, Andy, and your voice is currently coming in only on the left channel. So I don't,
you know why? Because I'm in stereo mode.
Yeah, I might want to turn off virtual sound or something.
There we go. I should be coming into both. Okay. So you saw that when I stopped the Dante Virtual Soundcard, it's essentially like unplugging it from the system, almost unplugging it from the system. It's still plugged in. I just stopped it. It's like and when I stop it, I can actually reconfigure it. You can see I have choices. I can have a 2x2, a 4x4, 8, all the way up to 64.
We're not seeing your screen share at the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Why did that go away? I don't know what I did there. Someone took it away from me, I guess. Let me go to here. Okay, there we go. So here's Dante Virtual Soundcard. It's not running at the moment. That's why Dante Controller doesn't see it. It doesn't see my computer. In here, though, while I'm here, you can reconfigure this to be a 2x2 all the way up to a 64x64 channels. And here, I'll just do this for a second so you see what happens. If I start it, it'll find it. Just discovered it like that. And now I have, actually, it has to figure something out here. Oh,
other device, that's the Avio.
There, thank you. You can see I have 64 channels if I extend this out. I don't need to show them. There's more channels down there. So you get the idea. I'm going to go back to my 8x8 because that's the one I like to use most of the time. So I'm going to stop this, go to 8x8, start
So
it.
Andy has several other devices, and he's about to bring his, I think, your Behringer online.
Yeah, let's do that. Something
Behringer
that you guys are
X32 with a...
let's do that. With a Dante card.
Yes, with the Dante card on it.
Okay, just plug that in.
Are there Dante cards available for most old legacy machines, or do you have to buy something new to be able to take advantage of this stuff? Jeff? There
are a range of Dante cards. So if you're talking about adding Dante cards into existing audio consoles, a lot of them have it. If you're talking about an old Yamaha console, they're limited by their particular Yamaha system that was 16 channels per card. Newer Yamaha consoles use Dante natively, so it's built into like the CL series and the QL series. And then you can add it to a TF series, which is their low-end console. And then there are hundreds and hundreds of devices that use the Audinate chips. So Audinate licenses their Brooklyn chips. And if you look on the audinate.com site, they have an entire list of devices, and they run the gamut of mic preamps to audio consoles to speakers to comm systems all over the place.
So anybody who does a lot of audio work might have equipment already in their system that can use this successfully.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So now we see that
Andy, you want, yeah.
Andy's
yeah.
Behringer X32 has been discovered. It's appeared there. So this is the routing page where he would make connections. So show us an example of just making what Audinate calls a subscription, which is a connection from a transmitter to a receiver. So it's a way to pass audio from one place to another. So you don't have to get out a cable, plug it from one device to another. Once everything is on the network, you can connect anything to anything.
Yeah. So what I'll do in a moment here is we'll play something, but this audio driver is just plugged into another computer I have in my studio here. And I want to send its outputs, or what it's hearing, basically the output of that computer, to the first two inputs on this Behringer, which I'll do right here. And it's instantaneous, even though the green check marks take a little while to pop up. If you were hearing the audio from that, they'd actually pop on within milliseconds. I don't know what it is, but it's generally within milliseconds.
So you might wonder, why is Andy using a USB to Dante device on a computer rather than installing Dante Virtual Soundcard on it? Well, Dante Virtual Soundcard is a license. And so if you had a presenter walk up with their laptop, you could plug this USB device into there and it would be on your Dante network without having to install software, drivers, or anything like that. And you wouldn't have to pay for a license. You could have one device and switch it between computers. So it's just another option.
It's basically taking the place of a USB direct box that has, you plug the computer in via USB and it outputs on XLR connectors to your mixer. It's essentially replaces that. So yeah, that's there. Oh, Jeff, before we get into questions, should we just show them what the device?
Well, let's go through the
like?
next tabs there. So that's the routing page. Device info will show you addresses, IP addresses. So if you're familiar with networking, you can dive into setting fixed IPs like Andy has done, but you don't need to do that. So Dante will work as a completely standalone network. So if you just have a switch and audio Dante devices connected to each other, they will look for a DHCP server. And not finding one, they will fall back to what is called link local, which you'll see as a address that starts with 169.254. That's not a Dante thing. That is a standard networking protocol. If devices don't find that, they go to 169.254 and they look out, they randomly pick an address on that network, that subnet, and they find an address that's empty and they take that one. And so if you just plug Dante devices together through a switch, they will find each other. In fact, if you just have two Dante devices, you can plug them directly to each other and they will find each other. So that auto discovery is great. And that's actually the recommended way for small systems and for beginners to get into this, is just leave everything on DHCP and let it discover. As we get into larger and larger systems and more network experience, people will often use fixed IP addresses, either manually assigning them or using a server to assign fixed IP addresses so that they can ping devices. But for beginners, I would start with DHCP.
And I see a PDF read thing that you just clicked on that people can go to for additional basic information if you're just starting out.
Yeah, I actually was going to pull something up, but we can do that later if needed. I just did two shows where everything was DHCP. It was a lot of devices that were DHCP on the network, and it was fine. We didn't need to have static addresses. I can't remember what Alex does at 090 Studios. I can't remember if that's 169 or they have static IPs, but it's fine.
Do you guys have more things you wanted to clear up, or do you want to?
Let's just jump through these other tabs real quick. So if we go to clock status, you can see that at the moment, the Behringer X32, Dante has decided amongst itself that will be the decider, the leader for sample clock. And how it does this is it has each device has a qualification of how good a clock it is, and it will pick the best clock it can. And if there are two devices with the best category clock, it will pick the lower IP address. So it automatically picks that. You have some ability to prefer a leader and choose what you want to be the clock leader for the system, but it will automatically determine that if you don't. And if any of those devices gets unplugged, it will automatically move to the next one. So you never lose sync. And all of that is negotiated amongst the network via precision time protocol.
And the reason I brought up the event log is to show you that this one says elevation to clock leader right here. When I plugged it in, it said, "Oh, that's a better device to be the leader. Let's do that."
That player has better time.
Yeah. So let me get back to the.
And if you're working with, say, Andy had other equipment that was not Dante, and yet it needed to be part of the clock, or maybe Dante needed to be associated with that clock. So he had, a video sync box, and he wanted his sample rate to be locked to the video sync. He has an enable sync to external checkbox for devices that have external sync. So he could lock his Behringer to video sync, and then the entire Dante network would lock to that clock, and everything would be synchronized. So,
and then we
quite flexible, but also somewhat foolproof.
We probably want to move along here to get to questions.
Bigger fools than Dante.
Yeah, we're about 20 minutes in. So
yeah, so here's network status, events we just looked at. And then the other thing, the last thing we should show before we get to questions, and this will be quick, I promise, is if you double click on one of these devices, you can see its transmit and receive statuses, among other things, which we won't get into. But here, let's look at this. So you see the little green lights? That's because I'm playing something. And here, we'll see if I can just switch this really quick, and maybe you'll hear it. Just give me a thumbs up if you hear it.
So that signal is actually a meter. And so it's a great diagnostic tool for determining where your signal is moving around the Dante network.
I recognize that tune.
And I'm gonna do this one more time, but I'm gonna click on these and you'll hear it go away, just so you just see that. And that'll be the last thing I think we probably should do before we get into Q&A, right? I don't think there's anything. Let's see. Let me go back to this.
Yep, it's disappeared.
Oh, and the only other thing I wanted to mention that we probably failed to mention is that Jeff said that you can use standard switches for this sort of thing. Managed switches are, I would say managed switches, not unmanaged switches, because you want to be able to go in there and do one very important piece of configuration, and that's turn off power saving, the EEE power saving, because you don't want your Dante ports to go to sleep ever. That's the only thing. And I have made that mistake where I thought I turned it off and I didn't, and Dante went to sleep. If you're interested in that story, I'll tell you about it later.
Sky, did you have a live question before we dive into the panel questions?
I come from the analog world, so I'm trying to get my head into what I'm looking at here. And I'm used to having a bridge of some kind with hundreds of cables coming in and hundreds of cables coming and plugs, and things like that. So am I understanding you that a lot of that signal path is now being sent through a computer chip that's in the device, and this is the software that's managing multiple devices and all of its gazinses and gazouses? Is that what I'm helping me understand?
Yes, basically. But it's important to
understand. I threw you a softball
that,
there, Jeff.
That none of the audio is going through the Dante controller software. The Dante controller software is telling the hardware in each Dante device where to connect its transmit to the receive of another device. And it's setting up what is called a subscription. So the receiving device subscribes to the transmitting device's audio. And
so
that
this is the
an
controller for
audio
that system.
connection.
Yeah, it's not the audio going through. It's just the control signal that's telling.
It's just making the connections.
There you go.
And it's worth yeah, sorry, it's worth noting too that, sorry, Jeff, to interrupt, that Dante controller is just making those subscriptions, and it is monitoring, helping you monitor your network. If I turned off and quit Dante controller, nothing would change. Absolutely nothing.
So the controller sets it up, makes sure it's working, and then it doesn't really have anything to do with it after that unless you relaunch it and change something.
It's akin to like if you were using an iPad to control your digital mixer, like a lot of people do with an X32. If you turned off the iPad, the mixer's still on and still passing audio.
And the patch is what the patches were.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd mention, Sky, too, is that, it's a little, you have to get used to transmitters and receivers. All they are inputs and outputs. That's all they are. It's digital cable. That's it.
Mickey had a comment.
Yeah, it's important also to note that these configurations of the subscriptions, where a transmitter sends to, is stored within the hardware themselves. It's not, you don't need some sort of controller that's always running on the network. If you power down the network fully, power up your switch, and only turn on two devices that have subscriptions to and from each other, they will talk to each other immediately as they are powered up.
And I just might add that I know you want to get into it. Might add that there are lots of instances where people never turn on controller. They don't even use it. They just use the hardware to do what they need to do. It does help when you get into more complex systems, though.
I let this go on because I think people are like me, coming to this without much understanding. So the more discussion we have of it to orient people, the better. But let's dive into our questions and see if that makes things even more clear.
All right. Ari Block from Tel Aviv, Israel writes in order to use Dante Virtual Soundcard, at least one piece of Dante hardware is required. If you are only planning to use DVSC, what would you buy and why?
And we're going to start with Jeff, go to Mickey, and then Danny. Jeff?
So first of all, that's a very true statement Ari makes, is you need at least one piece of Dante hardware. So you need at least one of their physical chips on the network. So Dante Virtual Soundcard being a piece of software does not have physical hardware, does not have that chip, and so therefore it cannot be the leader for the sample rate of the entire system. So you need some piece of hardware. The cheapest way to get into that is in one of these Dante Audinate AVIO. It's a simple device, and they make them with analog inputs, analog outputs, AES EBU. They make them with USB and even Bluetooth. So that's probably the simplest way to get into Dante, is have that and a license for Dante Virtual Soundcard that would give you a physical device on the system.
Mickey?
What I would go with what Jeff mentioned. Take a look at your current workflow and see what would come in handy more for you for what you're doing. Would an Alveo with two analog outs be handy for you, or would an Alveo with two analog ins be more of use to what you're already doing? And I would start off with that. That's how I started in the Dante world, which is single Alveo and a bunch of machines with DPS.
And Danny Law wants to get on this.
Yes, likewise. So the Dante Alveo adapters, they are lifesavers, and you just plug and play. You just route it through the Dante controller, and there you have it. The only thing that if you're gonna play around with those, just bear in mind they run on PoE.
Oh, so you need power over Ethernet in order to be able to energize them and make them work. Oops. Go ahead, Andy.
Unless you have this one, this is not an Audinate device. This is another manufacturer called Avista, and it will run on PoE, or I like this one because it has USB power. So if I don't have a switch handy, I can just plug in a wall wart and I'm done. And this particular one is outputs. So if I had Dante and I wanted to plug my speakers in another room, I could plug this in there and send it a signal, and I'd be good to go.
Okay, let's go to the next question.
All right. Brian Osterhout from Modesto, California writes in, if you were going to play a video with sound into a Dante or ATEM environment, would you send the sound out via Dante or connect the playback device directly to the X32 or ATEM?
Mickey's going to help us.
I think there's quite a few variables that could be at play here that would, push the decision making in two different ways. You had mentioned in your question that you have an X32. I would find a way to get the playback sound into the board and do your mixing on the board, as opposed to mixing sources together in an ATEM or somewhere down the line that is not designed for mixing audio. Do it at the mixing console.
Jeff?
That depends if I have this kind of thing at school where we have a streaming and a live environment. So if I need the video to just go into the stream, then I would go right into the ATEM and it would go into the stream from there. But if I need the video to also go out into the live environment and the audience in there can hear it, then my audio is going to need to go into the audio console so it can go out through the PA system. So that's kind of more the decision that I would make.
Andy, and I saw that your hand was up.
Yeah, and I just, in the corporate world that I live in, we use a variety of interfaces to take a computer's audio into the system. Most of the systems I'm working on are Dante. But the computers that we plug into the system, they'll either use an Avio or like a USB, often the USB interface as well. But they're always going to hit the mixer, and then they'll be distributed from there. That's the one common thing. They'll always hit the mixer and then be routed. So whether you use an Avio to get that audio into your system or use the headphone out into a direct box into your mixer, it doesn't matter. I think the quality of the Dante is much better. It's certainly on par with a USB sound card. So,
okay, let's go to the next question.
Brian Osterhout again from Modesto, California. When you use Dante, Zoom ISO, and an ATEM together with Zoom, when and where does the audio meet up with the video again? Is it the same for streaming, for example, YouTube, or for your local recordings?
And Mickey's going to start us off.
I would assume that you would have a mixing console to bring all those separate signals into to actually create your program mix. Now, where to embed the audio back into the video stream, the video pipeline, that would highly depend on your use case. I personally try to embed as late as possible to avoid any manipulation of my mix by multiple pieces of hardware in the path. So I try to embed as late as I can. There may be situations where you have, say, you can put an audio, a Dante to SDI audio embedder down the path from the video switcher, and I would prefer that route, or maybe even an AJA FS, HER, or FS4, or any of their frame syncs that can do audio embedding. I'd rather do it down the pipe instead of inside a video mixer. I don't usually trust video mixers to do audio stuff.
Fair enough. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writing in with probably the quintessential question that everybody has very quickly after adopting Dante things. Can you run Dante traffic on a network with other data, or is it best to use a dedicated switch or VLAN?
And Jeff Francis is going to start us off.
You can absolutely run it on a network with other traffic, because the important thing to remember is that often in these audio systems, even if it's a dedicated audio-only system, so take Yamaha consoles. Yamaha consoles, a CL5 with a Rio rack. The Rio rack is mic preamps and audio outputs that usually sits on stage with the performers to run microphones into when their monitors their monitor feeds come out of that. One, or we should say two, because we want to have a primary and a secondary network, but two Dante cables that run back to the audio console. Yes, there's plenty of Dante digital audio running down that network. But in addition to that, how are you changing the gain or turning on phantom power on your mic preamps? That is network traffic. That is network traffic that is on could be a different subnet, communicating between the console controller and the mic preamps in the rear rack on stage. So all of this traffic can coexist. Do you want to use a dedicated switch? Probably. I like to keep audio separate from everything else. So I'll let the audio controller data go with the Dante audio data, but I don't want regular internet traffic.
Mickey?
Yeah, as Jeff mentioned, you certainly can run what Audinate calls a converged network, wherein you have different kinds of traffic running through the same network. It just means that you have a lot more, well, not all, you have a bunch more management that you have to do within that network. You need to make sure that you have your quality, your QoS settings set up appropriately to be able to properly prioritize the different traffic running through your network, and also management of if you have any multicast traffic on the network, management of that gets even more important and more crucial.
And looks like next question's up.
Sarah Doyle from Falls Church, Virginia writes in, Dante had a recent release that now includes video routing. How does it compare to NDI in terms of network traffic saturation and reliability?
Jeff?
I can answer the first part of that, and that is the recent release is Dante AV, which adds video capability to it. As far as reliability and saturation, I have not explored Dante AV in any great depth, so can't answer that yet. Maybe in a later installment of Dante. In one of our Dante weeks, we can delve into Dante AV.
It's interesting that they think video is important enough to what they are doing to not specify or not kind of specialize in audio and move in there. Do you think they're trying to compete in any particular realm, or are they just adding this as a also you can see video, or they think they're going to try to manipulate it?
I think that they are getting into lots of large installations, so like campus-wide university Dante networks. And so a natural thing there is to add video.
That's very well thought. I didn't think about that, but that's a beautiful analysis of what might be happening. I can see that pretty easily. Next question.
Paul Walhus from Austin, Texas writes in, does the name of the protocol Dante turn people off?
I'm not sure how many people really connect it to anything else. And by the way, Jeff, that was a great explanation. I didn't realize that it was an acronym. And so I learned something here in the first 2 minutes, which pretty much happens to me every day on office hours. Nobody else raised a hand on this one. So that's just probably somebody out there thinks that it's the wrong name, but it's what it is. So next question.
I want to release a third-party Dante piece of equipment called the Inferno. I think that would be awesome. All right, Nigel Dessau writes in, when using VSC, you can get 8x8, I assume. Is this 8 channels out and 8 in? I can use Loopback to help me select on my Mac what goes out to VSC. How do I select what comes back to the Mac through the 8 channels that feed to the different places in? Oh boy, it's so long I have to get out and scroll.
There you go.
No,
and as long as you don't use the Inferno card in a disco, you're okay. Mickey Makachor is going to dive in here.
If you're using a piece of software that can individually address this different channels of an audio interface, say a DAW, usually if you select Dante Virtual Soundcard or any audio interface within a DAW, you can usually select within each channel which channel of that interface the audio is being picked up from. If you have to use a piece of software that does not give you that option, though, then creating a loopback device with Dante Virtual Soundcard as one of the sources, then only picking those channels to go into that virtual interface's outputs would allow you to route things to different places.
All right, next question.
Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany writes in, Neuman launched a new monitor speaker, the KH150 AES67, with Dante compatibility and, of course, an Ethernet port. What other Dante hardware in the network would I need to use these? And he has the link.
That's interesting. Jeff, start us off, and Mickey will come right behind you.
So you'd need, I imagine, either software that talks to the speaker, or you're going to need some way to reduce the level of the feed. The scary thing about digital speakers. I wouldn't want a digital speaker always to be at full gain and that I have to turn down the digital signal. So somewhere, we're used to analog speakers where we have a monitor level control. We got to have a volume control before our amplifier that feeds into our speakers. And so somewhere along the chain, you'd need that. I assume Neuman has taken care of that somehow, probably with a software control of their speaker. Or maybe you just have that in your DAW that you reduce the output that goes out to that. So you need something with that. And then if you just want to listen to your computer, then you would just need Dante Virtual Soundcard or even a USB to Avio device.
Mickey?
Yeah, as Jeff mentioned, essentially just to get signals going to it, you would need a source. It could be the Dante Virtual Soundcard, could be an Avio, it could be another piece of hardware. I totally agree that you would want a monitor controller in the path. Focusrite has a very, very popular one. Assuming you have a Focusrite RedNet interface, you can use that to route audio from your source into the controller and from the controller out to your monitor speakers.
It's interesting that they have as part of the name AES 67, because I'm used to that as the Audio Engineering Society kind of a standard that they have. Is that what that implies, or do we know that, or are they just using that for marketing?
AES 67 is an audio over IP standard. So there are several audio over IP standards, one of which is Dante. Ravenna is another one.
So they're saying essentially this is fully compatible with AES 67.
Yes, and Dante. So it can speak either language.
Makes sense. All right. Next question.
Actually,
go ahead,
Andy.
Yeah, sorry,
ahead,
I don't have the hand raising. Two things. One is the big difference between AES 67 and Dante is that Dante will do self-discovery of the devices, and AES 67 does not have that capability. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, I think when they developed Dante and released it even before the standard for AES 67 was finalized. But I think in the spec for AES 67, it was never, they never decided to have self-discovery like Dante can do as part of its spec. I'm sure they talked about it, but yeah, that's one. And two is around devices you can control, Dante devices you can control with software. This is something I think Jeff Keithley will get into, because I worked on one of his tennis tournaments that he was handling all the production for. And he has lots of devices that are mic preamps he used to use. Now he's using, I think, a Rio, a Yamaha Rio. And he doesn't even have a Yamaha console. He has a different brand of console that has a Dante card, and he's just remote controlling into those mic preamps to adjust them. Just as Jeff was referring to the Neuman speakers, you'd want to remote control into them and adjust them somehow. But you don't need to have, for example, you don't need to have a Yamaha mixer if you have a Yamaha stage box, Dante stage box. You can just remote control into it. It's called R Remote is the software that uses that.
So it allows some cross-platform, essentially, talk back and forth. Mickey had a thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to add like other options for monitor controllers / interfaces that can push out to Dante are the Grace Design has one. Also, Digital Audio Denmark's AX32 and AX32 and AX64 could also push out Dante from a variety of sources, and also the Avid's Matrix and Matrix Studio.
Great. We have so much expertise here. We've got about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more questions, so we're going to move a little faster here. Let's get to the next one.
All right, lightning round, here we go. Kenny Hampton from Greenville, Illinois writes in, given the Dante card is not transmitting audio, how is audio getting to the devices?
Jeff, start us, and Mickey right after.
Not sure which Dante card he's talking about, but the Dante card, if we're talking about the one in the X32, it is transmitting audio. And if we're talking about Dante Virtual Soundcard, it is transmitting audio over that Ethernet. So that,
Mickey?
Unless I'm reading this question wrong.
Yeah, perhaps Kenny might be talking about the Dante controller. Controller is only used for configuration. It does not transmit or receive any audio.
There you go. Hopefully that helped. Next question.
All right. Ronnie Holfsey from Trumasu, Norway writes in, how to record multi-channel audio coming through Dante into Mac or Win machine, what software, and how to best handle or sync the timestamp, for example, Rosendahl Nanosync or similar devices.
And Jeff and Mickey again. Jeff, go ahead.
So you just need Dante Virtual Soundcard and some kind of DAW that can record. So even a light version, Nuendo Live, or Ardor, Reaper, any of those, any DAW can work to do the recording. To sync, I'm assuming you're talking about getting external sample clock sync from something like the Nanosync. There you would need a physical hardware device that allows sync to external, and that would need to connect. So you might think that you could use the Avio AES device and connect that, but unfortunately the AES in is sample rate converted, so it will automatically sync to the Dante clock, not sync the Dante to the Nanosync. So you would need to go with a higher end audio device that allows sync to external.
Okay, we're going to go to Mickey and then sneak over to Andy. Mickey?
For simple multi-track recording, I would highly recommend an application called Boom Recorder, which does one thing, does it really well. Boom Recorder can take in, just in case for sync, if you mean timecode sync, Boom Recorder can take timecode coming in through an audio interface. So if you feed LTC into a Dante channel, you can select that Dante channel as a source for LTC within Boom Recorder. You can do the same for Reaper. You can take LTC from a Dante source in Reaper. If you're talking about Genlock, you might want to look into Studio Technologies has a Genlock box that can take an external Genlock and feed that as the clock source for a Dante network.
Andy?
Yeah, and for the rest of you who aren't concerned to just want to let Dante handle the clock and all of that, I had to do a corporate event where they wanted isolated tracks of all of the individual presenters and their mics. So we used Reaper and Dante Virtual Soundcard along with a Yamaha console, and the Yamaha console was running the event, and all I was doing was recording those individual tracks via Dante Virtual Soundcard into Reaper. Reaper saw Dante Virtual Soundcard as a multi-channel audio device, and it was easy.
All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael writing in, for low latency applications like playing virtual instruments, what hardware assisted Dante interfaces would you recommend, considering that PCIe cards are no longer available?
Jeff Francis.
So the Dante Virtual Soundcard has a higher latency. I think it's like 10 milliseconds. Most Dante hardware is down in the 1 or sub 1 millisecond latency. So if you're looking for hardware, probably RME has a Dante box, or the Avid Matrix Studio.
Okay, next question.
Sarah Doyle writing in from Falls Church, Virginia. DVS on Windows defaults to WDM instead of AVIO. What is there a big difference between the two?
And no one has raised their hand on this yet, so I'm not sure if the Windows WDM standard instead of Avio, if there's anybody on the panel today who has much experience with using that. Doesn't seem like it, so we may have a pass on this one and need to go on. Sarah, come back another day, and you may have a different panel here, and there may be somebody who can do that. Next up.
Paul Valhus writing in, what headset is Andy Lipnick using, and how does it interface with Dante PDMFOM?
Andy, this is the only person who can possibly answer this question.
Okay. Well, first of all, this is what am I got here? Hold on one second. I need to look at the label. It's Sennheiser HMD 300. So this is a broadcast quality, like announcer mic headset, like a sporting person might use. That's the headset. I had it actually connected to the Behringer at one point, but I had to do some rerouting, so now it's plugged into the Focusrite. But no, this actually it terminates in a standard TRS headphone jack and a 3-pin XLR. And the nice thing about this headset is you can replace this cable and turn it into a comms headset where it has a 4-pin male or female connector on it if you want to plug it into a ClearComm or an RTS or something like that.
Nice. Another example of office hours making people spend money. Moving on to the next question.
Sure. Ronnie Hufse from Tromsø, Norway. What is the current status on chip shortage for Dante chips?
Mickey.
I'm not sure specifically about the chips themselves, but in terms of Dante-enabled products, there has been stock coming in and out every now and then. So what most vendors suggest is if you need a Dante-enabled piece of hardware, put in the order and you will eventually get it. It comes and goes. Stock comes and goes.
And Nigel, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was looking for Dante Avio USB-C connection, and you can get one on Amazon for $300, or you can find them for about $159. I got one on B&H last night that they said they were in stock, but it comes in and out. I'm told that general supply will be better by December.
Ooh, this is good. So Dante cards are a little bit like concert tickets. The market will tell you what you have to spend to get one today.
I just have one comment about that too. Yeah. I work with a Yamaha dealer who happens to own also a sound company. So I buy my Yamaha products through him, and yeah, there's a long wait, and that's a Yamaha supply chain issue. I'll just say that. During the hardest parts of the pandemic in terms of supply chain, the bigger chips, the Brooklyn chip, which is the chips that can do lots of channels, those were in short supply. And Audinate did make an announcement just, I think, 3 or 4 months ago, something like that, that they are working to resolve that problem because they've redesigned the chips to source them from different places so that they don't run into this again. I don't know where they're at in that whole process of converting to that for supply chain, but that is on their website somewhere in their announcements.
Fair enough. We got everything taken care of there. So next question.
Douglas Carmichael writing in, if you have one room in a facility using SoundGrid on a dedicated network and you wanted to send audio to other rooms on a separate facility-wide network, would you bridge SoundGrid to Dante or use another tool or protocol? He's suggesting Unity Connect.
Mickey, thoughts on that?
Yeah, Unity Connect is really designed to transport audio across the open internet, not so much within a local network. With this use case, I would honestly ditch SoundGrid and just go full Dante.
Answered then. Next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas writes in, is there a big dummies guide to Dante?
Yeah, I would need the bigger dummies guide to Dante, but let's have Jeff Francis answer this.
So Audinate.com has actually some great training tools. They have certification, 3 certification levels at least, and then some additional ones for Dante Domain Manager and things like that. But if you start with Dante Level 1 and go through their training tools, I would consider that the big dummies guide.
Excellent. Sky.
I think I qualify for this book, but Jeff, I continue to learn so much from you. So thank you for bringing it and simplifying it for anybody, whether they're big or not.
Okay, next question.
Ronnie Hofse from Tromsø, Norway. Are there any stability issues on the M1 Mac using internal Ethernet ports for the software-based Dante Virtual Soundcard? What issues could arise using DVS on Mac?
And Jeff and Mickey. Jeff, go ahead.
It has long been Dante protocol to avoid internal Mac NICs. So the recommended thing is the Belkin USB-C to Ethernet for all Dante use, laptop or desktop. Have they fixed that in the M1? I haven't tried it. Mickey's shaking his head no. I've had people run into problems, call me. I'm like, are you using the internal port? They're like, yep. I was like, put a dongle on there. Problems are gone. So always the dongle. It's just the type of Ethernet chip that is used in the internal Macs.
Interesting. Mickey?
Yeah, and this is certainly something that I guess going back to one of the previous questions, it is discussed in the Dante certification courses and also well documented in their white papers. So I suggest, read the white papers, take the certification courses if you can. It's an issue that dates back to, I believe, 2014 or 2016 Mac internal NICs. So it's something that's well known if you take the time to read about Dante.
And Jason has a thought.
Yeah, I mentioned before we were on the air, but just in the staging beforehand, this can be maddening because you can actually order, the same Mac Mini from the same year and get two different internal NIC chipsets. Apple doesn't always differentiate between one and the other. And I've seen situations where the onboard NIC will work with one and not with the other, and it's exactly the same spec. So yeah, just get a dongle and forget about it.
There you go. Next question.
Paul Valhus asks, Nigel, can you tell us about your journey with Dante, how it started, how it's going, and how much farther you have to go?
Nigel?
Well, I'm not going to do all of that because that'll take the rest of the hour, but I would tell you that learning Dante, getting certification level 1 was pretty easy. Certification level 2 is a bit harder. Well worth doing. I've made the Dante stuff work, the virtual sound card and the Avios really well. Where I am struggling is I added an X32 in the middle of that, and I'm piling my way through that. I'm trying to learn. I will at some point ask Mickey and others for help, but I feel like I've got some discovery and learning to go through before I get there. So the basics Dante stuff is really easy, works really well. X32 is causing me a problem, but I would tell you, you need to know networking, because it's actually the networking part that really can throw you a loop.
Jeff?
I will say two things to that. The networking thing, a little bit of network knowledge is really dangerous. That was in my early time with Dante. I tried to be too smart for it. And it was much better if I said, I know nothing about network, you do it all, and just plug stuff in. And then, Nigel, I know the X32. The problem with adding a console is the X32 has its own routing system between the internal audio in the X32 and its external gazindas and gazoutas, one of which is Dante. So you have this additional routing matrix in addition to the routing matrix that you have built into Dante controller, which controls the Dante network. So you have this double routing matrix where you can really, really confuse yourself. Ask me how I know.
I just want to, it's almost time. Oh, go ahead, Andy, finish up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel your pain, Nigel, about the routing on the Behringer. It's something I've never liked how they've implemented it. It's very confusing, even before they had a Dante card. So I feel your pain there. It's just a matter of kind of learning what they're doing there. And the other thing I will say is this, is that 99.5%, no, let me amend that, 98% of Dante problems are making networking mistakes. 1% is confusion around how a manufacturer is implementing it. And the last 1% is, yeah, something's broken. Or, but that is such a rare thing. Once Dante's up and running, it just stays running. It really doesn't generally have problems. If it does have a problem, it's because something wasn't configured right.
Okay, we have a couple of last little comments, then we'll wrap things up. Sky and then Mickey.
Stefan Fischer, thank you for pointing out that we are using terms that are unusual and bizarre, and gazinza and gazoutza is not a real word. They're just funny phrases.
No, it is. You won, Sky. I was going to whisper that at the end.
Well, I'm sorry, but Stefan is desperately trying to learn stuff, and that it's just we're being silly.
Yeah, if you're looking up gazinnas and gazoutas, you're not going to find it
anywhere. So I just wanted to reassure. No,
my fault.
I was using it earlier, and that's where I think
I've been hearing it in audio since the earliest days of panels, so it's a
It's
standard
right
thing.
next to the Kosmutskas.
Yeah, that's right. Let's go to
that's when
Mickey.
things go south,
Mickey,
yeah.
wind us up. We're getting close to the top here.
Oh, yeah. In terms of the routing, like you essentially have that within any piece of transmitter or receiver that is used in a Dante configuration. Say, like Nigel, you had mentioned earlier about routing within Loopback, and that Loopback is, I guess, in this specific use case, is your either your source or destination for Dante Virtual Soundcard. So within each piece of hardware that is transmitting or receiving, you will have to do some sort of routing there, be it a simple plug the Avios XLR into a speaker, or do some routing within Loopback. At the end of the day, like, yes, Dante is very heavy on knowing IP networks and how they work, but on the audio side of things, it goes back to the basics of signal flow, following a chain of a single path, where the signal starts at one place, goes to another, and starts there again, and goes to another, and to another, and to another.
And I'm just going to say, we're for finishing up here. I remember the first time I got to a large show as part of the crew, and they said we're doing all of our video and audio on IP instead of things. And it was really frustrating at first because I was so used to plugging in an XLR cable and the signal was either there or not. And so I kept plugging in all these little telephone cables, it felt like to me, and there was nothing there. And I'd come back 5 minutes later and there was something there because the system had to recognize that there was a thing there it could talk to and actually start talking to it. This is the future. I don't think anybody has a doubt in their mind that as we go forward, the complexity of what we need to do and the pervasiveness of all this digital content over IP means that we all need to understand this as best we can to do our jobs going forward. So huge thank you to Jeff and to Andy and to Mickey, who has left us probably to finish up the show on the back end. Thank you all for helping those of us who don't have to deal with this every day kind of get up to speed, because it's going to be more and more important. And that's part of what Office Hours is here to do, to help everybody get up to speed increasingly as we go here. A couple little last minute announcements. Don't forget that website Building with Ken Jordan starts right now, and I'm running a little bit late to do that. So let me move on. Conversations with Tony Mobley tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I'm not sure what it is. On Thursday, Loopback and Audio Hijack here. So that's tomorrow. Felipe Bias and Chris Fenwick are going to be here talking about that. Keenan Campbell is doing his Friday thing. He's going to be talking about avoiding production disasters, and the topic is emergency management kind of stuff. That's going to be really cool. All the regular Saturday stuff, and I'm going to finish up because we're over time, and I don't want to mess up Ken's move over. So head over to After Hours, roll credits, and thank you all for being with us today on Office Hours. We'll be back right here tomorrow. Bye.
That was great.
Andy,
Thank you, guys.
Andy,
Great
one more
explanation.
last thing, and then one more last thing. I don't know how many last. I think you need to reevaluate what one more last thing is, Andy. Okay, all right, I got it. I get this is the time where we all whisper over the credits.
Yeah, this is where the gazingas and the gazalkas go out into the gablaxkas for the credits.
See y'all tomorrow, same time, same station.
So great to see the Gajefkas.
Bazinga.
Bazonga.